The session that we've got coming up now, I'm really excited about. We're going to be talking about how diversity in a newsroom can improve audience-centric content. So I think it's adding to this theme of adding value that we've talked about, all morning, and adding value to the content that people are paying for. You can see that we've got an incredible panel here, and I'm going to introduce Stéphane in a second. But first of all, we have a surprise guest, or not so surprising, depending where you sit, but because this whole conference is really made possible by the Google News Initiative, so we're very thankful for that. But actually, for Google, this is diversity is a major focus for them at the moment. I know that from all the conversations I've had with them, and especially with talking to Madhav Chinnappa, who's their Director of News Ecosystem. So Madhav, did you want to just say a few words about how this topic is important for you at Google before we start?
Thank you, Nick. Yes, and it's an honor to kind of introduce this session, and I'll try and be brief. But I wanted to explain why Google, through our Google News Initiative, is sponsoring this session in particular. GNI is our overarching program to enable a sustainable, diverse, and innovative ecosystem of quality journalism. Please notice the intentional inclusion of the word diverse. I think we've been learning a lot over the past few years, and we obviously don't have all the answers, but we've made a few observations, and I think one of them is that community and audience engagement matter. It sounds like the sessions before have been talking about this, so I won't go on to that because you guys are the real experts. But it is my personal belief that for news organizations to do this effectively, it's imperative that they understand the diversity of their communities and reflect that to their audiences in the most inclusive and equitable way possible. And that's why we are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion at Google and at GNI, and as part of our role through the ecosystem. In the green room, someone was asking me about what Google is doing in this space, and luckily for you, I'm not going to kind of bore you with all the things that we're doing. I would just say two quick things. One is we're coming out with a kind of impact report about all our work, and so you'll be able to read that there. And the second is partial apologies. I have to drop off after half an hour because one of the things that we're doing under diversity, equity, and inclusion, we had an innovation challenge in North America around that very specific topic. So we're working our way through over 200 applications, and that's what I'll be doing in 22 minutes. So with that, I will hand you back over to the speakers for this session. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Madhav, and it's good to hear that you guys are really walking the walk on this topic. So really happy to have the panel that we have, and Stéphane's going to lead us off. So Stéphane Mayoux is a coach on Table Stakes Europe, which you've heard mentioned a few times, and I've shared the link if you do want to check that out. Of course, it is also supported by the Google News Initiative Digital Growth Program, so plug there. And we have a little bit of a BBC theme, so some of you who know Madhav will realize that he was once upon a time at the BBC, spent a lot of time at BBC News. That Stéphane was also some time at the BBC. We were just discussing how long before this. And he's someone who really thinks deeply about how organizations work, and has spent a lot of time working with all the up and coming talent at the BBC. And really actually in recent times focusing on this topic of diversity, also in discussions with BBC and other organizations. So Stéphane, I'm going to hand over to you to take it from here.
Thanks very much, Nick. Thanks, Madhav, for the intro as well. So this particular session is trying to link diversity in newsrooms to content. And this is why the panel, I suppose, is made up of journalists. So let me introduce who is on the panel just now. First, Alexandra Borchardt. She is a fellow coach on the Table Stakes Europe project. We are trying, part of this project is to support newsrooms to go audiences first. Alexandra is a journalist with extensive experience in leadership roles. She's also a professor of journalism in Berlin, and has been a senior research associate at the Reuters Institute in Oxford. And she will present the content and findings of a study she did on talent and diversity. So welcome, Alexandra. and thanks for being here with us. The other member of the panel is Ramaa Sharma, who has been working with the BBC for the past 17 years. She's a senior editor within BBC News. She has been delivering a number of digital transformation projects in news, and this is where we met. And recently, she has been exploring diversity through an editorial lens, I must say, and through her personal experience as a leader and as a woman of color. My experiences in diversity has also been as an editor within the BBC African service. So I've got a particular lens as a white minority person in those topics. So for, the session will be structured roughly in 3 parts. We're going to start with Alexandra, who is going to share her findings for roughly 20 minutes. Then I'll be in conversation with Ramaa for an extra 20 minutes, and then we'll take all your questions. And I know, Madhav, you need to leave at some stage. If at any point in time you would like to jump in, please, before you go, feel free to do so. Thank you very much in advance. So, Alexandra, all yours.
Well, thank you, Stéphane, for the very nice introduction, and hello, everyone. Some familiar faces, other faces. I really hope this can add value to what you've been learning about diversity in the newsroom. That's been a topic that's been keeping us busy, for at least the past few years. And actually, it's a topic that's very close to my heart, having grown up in a very non-diverse environment of German news organizations. I've always been struggling about that, and obviously, it's something that it is the right thing to do. That's what most people understand. And then there's been this big discussion: does it make business sense? But more recently, I think it's really important to emphasize that it's actually at the core of digital transformation. And now I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, I hope that is all right. And oops, I'm sharing my screen and moving to the next. Yes, and this is the point I would like to make throughout this. It is really key to digital transformation, because diversity and inclusion, in fact, is essential for an audience-first perspective, and that's the perspective we are all heading towards. Let me first present you a few things from some study we did. I'll talk about the study in a minute. But what do editors think about diversity? And this year, from Ole Sakrisson, from the head of news of Sveriges Radio, this is very typical. That he said in an interview for this study, the state of diversity in newsrooms is generally very poor. There's been so much focus on digital transformation in recent years. The question of diversity had to stand aside. And actually, this is what this should be all about, really, to merge these 2 topics, because these are not separate topics. And this is something that you could also use to argue in your company, in your newsroom. And this is what Joanna Webster of Reuters in London said in her previous role, where she was still managing editor and concerned with diversity. And I won't read the complete quote to you, but it's just, she said, it impacts our ability to create world-class journalism. And this is what it is all about. It's not about just only doing the right thing, even though it is the right thing to do, but it is the ability to create world-class, audience-first, let me add that, journalism. Yeah, the study we did, and I did that from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism in Oxford and the University of Mainz. We cooperated on that. The study was, are journalists today's coal miners? Because it was not only a study on diversity, but also on talent. And I'll tell you in a minute why these are intrinsically linked. And we did qualitative interviews in Germany, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. And we interviewed editors-in-chief, we interviewed heads of journalism schools and programs, and also we interviewed students. Yes, the study focused on three assumptions. And the first assumption is the talent challenge will be the next big challenge for journalism. And it's actually a challenge that has not been seen as such in the big organizations, big news brands, but very much so as the local level, because it's so much harder to find talent actually. And that has an effect that journalism has become even less diverse in recent years, because it used to be a very non-academic profession where you could just, work your way up from, from high school maybe, and then you became a journalist, maybe a police reporter. So you had all these diverse people in newsrooms, and with a focus on big brands, winner take all scenarios, you have a more academic crowd of journalists, and newsrooms have grown less diverse, in particular with respect to social class. Why is the talent challenge? Why is it really serious? Let me go through here real brief. Well, Madhav, you're here, people choose Google or Spotify. Why would they choose, for example, public service? This is Ann Lagercrantz, head of Swedish TV, who said that, because, it's a lot of work and it might not be that creative. And and it's also very demanding. It's a 24/7 thing, when Corona is on, coronavirus crisis is on, you can't just go home and say, let me have some flexible work schedules here. And people really, they need all kinds of skills now. They can't just be, great writers, but they also need all kinds of technical skills and interpersonal skills. And the demands are really high for really low salaries. Also, the trouble is with young people, the young generation lacks new media role models. I mean, think about what kind of movies, what comes to your mind when you think about, journalists or newsrooms being portrayed in movies. Well, it's all about these kind of newsrooms that people like I grew up in, very, print and investigative journalism, whatever. But is there any kind of new role model for the younger generation they can identify with and move forward? I doubt it. And then there's the fake news debate and a very hostile environment. In some countries, we heard that news these days that in the Netherlands, actually TV broadcasting operations, they removed the signs of their broadcasting vans because their journalists were being attacked. So it's a profession, low pay, reputation, you don't really know, no role models. So where are we moving? So the talent question will be a really tough question to solve. But there's assumption number 3, and this is the problem with the talent question also. Not only do we have a lack of talent, or maybe less people who are really, burning for becoming journalists, working in the media, but also we're not really attracting the right talent that you need to have diverse environments, diverse and inclusive environments, because, this is a crowd of its own. And it says that here and on that Guardian column, pale, male and posh, the media is still a class of its own. So it's not really, you get lots of applications still, for particularly the major media brands, by people like this, but will you get the others? Probably not. And you all know that there's also a problem of audiences to really identify with what's going on in the media. And this is from a few years back when Lionel Barber was still, well, he was editor until last year, but this is still from way back when someone black wrote a black reader wrote in a column, a letter to the editor and said, you're so far removed from reality. So, to regain trust with audiences, you really need to solve that problem. And this is not new to me, really. Well, and this is also not new, because it used to be kind of, this is funny. This is the scene from the movie His Girl Friday. Well, but newsrooms very often still look like this. This is not very old, the picture. And actually, at the Reuters Institute, a few colleagues at the Reuters Institute, led by Simga Andi, they just did a study this year. And they studied 200 major news outlets across 10 markets, and they found that only 23% of the top editors across these 200 major news outlets were female, actually, but except for 40 of the journalists. 40% of the journalists were female. Now, male and female, this is not the only issue with diversity. And this is another study that is actually from Nick Newman's Journalism, Media and Technology Trends and Predictions that was published in January this year. That is a leader survey that he's doing every year, every December actually, and he'll be very happy if you participate in it. And he just asked newsrooms, you know, what's actually your state of managing diversity, and you know, lots of respondents. It was about a little bit more than 200 said, you know, gender diversity, we're doing quite well on this. Less well we're doing on, you know, diversity in terms of where do your journalists come from? Do they come from rural areas or urban areas? Because there's a big focus on the big cities. Also, political diversity is a subject that is not necessarily tackled that well, because there are, you know, newspapers, news organizations tend to have one political direction, and obviously the staff crowds around that particular political leaning. And the hardest thing to tackle is obviously, and I guess that reflects the experience of many of you, is racial diversity. Except for doing a good job is also something you could interpret, because gender diversity, you know, people feel, oh, you know, we're doing a good job, but what does that mean? Is that a question of, you know, just having enough women on board, or is that also a question of status? I mean, in Germany, around 10% of editors-in-chief of German local media and local news organizations are women, 10%. Then inevitably, when you present leadership with these kind of statistics, they say, hey, but isn't there great journalism? We're doing great journalism. This is Washington Post applauding for colleagues who won the Pulitzer Prize. You know, we're doing great journalism, aren't we? Yes, but are you really? And this is actually my current all-time favorite slide of the Digital News Report 2019 that the Reuters Institute also publishes annually, but this was last year's, and I show that actually on every journalism conference. People who know me will know that chart, because this is actually questions that the respondents were asked in that biggest ongoing survey of online news consumption behavior.
Okay, it seems that we've lost Alexandra for now.
Yes.
Okay, you're back.
Oh, I was gone. Okay, sorry.
Past 15 seconds.
Okay, so a lot of respondents agreed on that statement. The news media keeps me up to date with what is going on. So that was 2/3 about. Less people agreed, you know, on, you know, the news media does a good job explaining. Even less agreed with the statement on, you know, do they hold powerful people to account? But what should be of interest to us is really the top two parts. And actually very few people agreed with the topics chosen by the news media feel relevant to me, and the news media uses the right tone. Only 16% agreed with that. And that might have to do something. I mean, this is just, could be one explanation. This might have to do something with the lack of diversity in content, with a lack of respect for others. So the tone is quite important. Also, we are seeing an increasing digital divide in journalism, which is something that no one who was excited about the opportunities of the internet had expected back in the days. And this is also research from the Reuters Institute. So this is all, what the colleagues in the Reuters Institute are doing research on. It's really, there's really evidence that today, even with, you know, online and digital news, less people from socially lower background get in touch even with media than before. So there's this increasing gap, because the better educated are able to navigate and use a variety of news sources. the less educated consume even less news than in the old world of print and TV. So that is a problem journalists should be concerned about, because they should be really interested in tackling that digital divide. And this is last assumption, number 3, is diversity affects content. Yeah, I pulled out some example that I found really super interesting, even though it's already a couple of years old. But this was the FT's investigation into the President's Club, an all-male fundraiser that was done by a female reporter, and that was so un-FT. I used to work for Financial Times Deutschland, so I know FT culture a little bit. This was so un-FT as you could imagine, and this thing ended up to be the number 7 of the most read stories in 2018, because it was a very, driven by a female reporter, apparently also surrounded by controversy in the newsroom. There are some FT colleagues on here. And this really shows that, diversity can affect content. It doesn't necessarily has to affect content, because we'll hear about that later, but it can affect content. And this is some example from the BBC that Katie Lloyd, their development director, told me about. This is a Black reporter reporting on the death, the stabbing of a male model, and she apparently found a tone of voice. Remember, tone of voice is a thing that the Black community where that happened felt very comfortable with. And this was a community that wasn't necessarily the particular audience. So these are 2 examples for stories that really made a difference. And it's not only about it's not only about content, it's also about formats, because obviously you reach different kinds of people with different formats. You reach them on Instagram, you reach them on YouTube and in other environments. The state of newsroom diversity today, just to sum this up, there's a talent shortage because big brands still attract talent. The decline of local media leads to less diverse experiences. And very unfortunately, when leaders talk about diversity, they emphasize different things. They don't see it as a holistic thing to tackle, and they don't talk audiences. They talk about a huge problem. And the bigger you really create the problem, the harder it is to solve if you don't really break it up into something. And there's actually a lot of talk about diversity from a balcony perspective, but in the daily doings of newsrooms, there's really still not that much done. Maybe with the major brands, and we'll learn from the BBC, but there was a blog published on the London School of Economics last week, where a colleague did a study on diversity, and she also looked at Sweden, and I don't quite remember the markets, but she also said that it rarely ever was actually even mentioned in the newsrooms. And newsrooms are at least successful in achieving racial diversity, but gender is also a problem, not of numbers, but of status. And then last but not least, there's family of many cultures that you want to attract to journalism to create that diversity. They don't consider journalism to be an honorable profession, and the trust debate really makes it worse. They want their kids to have be in some decent profession. This is actually a result of our study, and the lack of language skills obviously can add to all the challenges that we have. Finally, what works, and I wrote this recommendation paper for the European Federation of Journalists that was published this year in January, and these are 10 things. I'll just run through them quickly, because you can have access to the study, and we want to have time for the interview. First of all, what works to top management? You need to be committed and communicate this commitment clearly, and you must not tolerate undermining efforts. That's been actually throughout my experience in journalism very often that, there's always these kind of people who laugh about sort of efforts, and if you as top managers don't make that clear that this is not tolerated, this will go on and undermine all efforts. Active recruitment, professional recruitment, that's something that hasn't really been practiced in the profession, in the industry, because, you know, you always have these huge piles of applications. So you never really went out actively and recruited in the communities where you really want to have your talent from. The industry really has to change practices on that. Diversity needs to be managed. There are diversity candidates that need initial support, language training, maybe also help because they can't really identify the cultural hints and so the cultural things, and they don't really know what certain things mean if they didn't attend a certain school, or certain families don't have a certain family background. So managing diversity is really important also in terms of conflict management. Diversity is not necessarily easy to manage. What also really works out is develop different career tracks for different kinds of talent. Not everyone has to be the super author who's able to write whatever, you know, 1,000-word story on something, but people have very different talents, and some people would like to go in the tech direction, some people would like to go in community management, whatever. Develop different career tracks. Don't do a one-size-fits-all education any longer, or training. Yeah, address unfair practices like the gender wage gap, and this is not a box ticking thing. So don't play off different aspects of diversity against each other, like, you know, oh, we did this, we did this, we did this. Instead, work on inclusion. Start with diversity, but follow suit with inclusion, because if you don't really have a cultural change in inclusion, diverse talent will try to adjust to the inherent standards and won't really speak up and develop own ideas. Revive career tracks for non-academics. Some companies had that for the longest time and never pursued it. I know that the BBC does do that. Keep and communicate metrics. There's no metrics, you can't monitor progress. You don't know where you are and where you are getting, and if your strategies work out correctly. And what is really important is monitor content diversity separately, like for example, the BBC does with the 50-50 project, because as I said, it's not necessarily that diverse staff leads to diverse content. And yeah, there are tools that track gender, for example. There are tools that track that. There are some from Canadian media, and there's the Janet bot that the FT has developed to track how many women are just portrayed in pictures. So there are tools, but actually it's not only a tool thing. Yeah, and metrics are important, but this all comes down to cultural change. And this is something also that Katie Lloyd said. The BBC has very strict metrics. Ramaa will tell you all about them in a minute, but it is also about culture. And the former Director General of the BBC, Tony Hall, put it that way. And I really like that quote. What leadership needs to do is making conversations about culture possible. So just 3 points to take away. Cultural change in newsrooms is essential to attract, in particular to retain talent, because employees need to feel safe the way they are. They need to be accepted and included. Diversity needs to be seen as an essential part of the audience-first digital transformation, because diversity improves content and products. And yeah, talent creates products. No talent, no product. Products build trust, and trust is the core of all business models. So it's really the core of your success if you manage to pursue strategies for diversity and inclusion. Yes, and thank you so much. This was it from my part.
Thank you very, very much, Alexandra. Towards the end of your very comprehensive presentation, we got a question from Thomas. Thomas, would you like to raise the question yourself? Would you like me to read it? You're muted, Thomas.
So hi, Alexandra.
Hi, Thomas.
Thank you for speaking here. So my question, you showed your favorite charts. so as much as you know that, as I appreciate the idea of responding to the needs of readers, no question about it, don't you think, isn't there a risk of giving up on yourself and the idea of the world as you see it? Or let me point it this way, isn't there a risk of how far should you go to hit the right note that readers, users are missing so much, according to your favorite chart? You know, you got me here. How far should we go in this regard?
So how far should we go in terms of adjusting to the reader's tone of voice?
So your chart told us that obviously we don't find the right tone, as it's said. Okay. So how far should we go here?
Obviously, this also depends on your audience. I mean, there's different audiences that have different expectations also on your tone. I mean, the thing with the tone is most people, what they criticize about the tone is really that the news media is way too negative and not very constructive. So we're opening up this whole topic of constructive journalism here. And this is actually, I think, important for all kinds of audiences, because lots of people are so tired of being stuff thrown at them. But if you offer them a perspective, if you show them how they can affect things, how they can actually, be active and be participants, or be citizens and do something, this is really important. So the tone is very much also about that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, go down to colloquial language in every respect or whatever you understand. But obviously you have to sort of meet your different audiences also in some sort of tone that they can relate to. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's unattractive and not interesting for other audiences. But for example, with newsletters, some organizations just use newsletters to experiment with stuff in different tones of voice for particular audiences that might not find expression in the big major main news product they're producing. To address different audiences through newsletters is for example one strategy. Does that answer some of you? I don't want to.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. No,
Okay.
thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you very much for your answer, Alexandra. And this is something I think we'll try also to tackle with Ramaa just now. I think the key question, Thomas, that I've heard before in Newsroom is, how much shall I give up of myself as well? Yeah, and you said, the answer that I'm trying to bring, and we'll discuss it with Ramaa just now, it's not about giving up part of myself. It's about widening what I can do. It's about widening my skills rather than negating the skills I might already have or the tone I might already have. Okay, because Ramaa and I have been working together for quite a while, we decided to offer this part of the session as a conversation, and let's see how it goes. If you got questions, please send them in the chat to everyone, and I'll pick them up as we go along. Now, thanks, Ramaa. I've said you're a senior editor at the BBC. You've been involved in digital transformation and in diversity programs as well. I'm wondering, for you personally, what links do you make between content creation and diversity?
I think there's a huge link. I mean, it's kind of neatly follows on from what Thomas was saying, is that if we all acknowledge that we all have biases, we all have a worldview, we all have cultural elements, and we may have been to journalism school and got really good at finding stories that we believe to be universal. We're human, and we will, from our own perspective, pick stories and think about stories in a particular way. Now, if we start from that premise, which, however uncomfortable it might be, I personally believe to be true, then we've got to realize, to do really good journalism, we're going to need lots of people with lots of different perspectives to come to a place of some better truth. So that's why I think actually it's really, really important to kind of have a real sense of who you are and what you bring and what's missing, in order to make sure that when you're doing your journalism, you can look for those gaps in your knowledge and create really good journalism. And I think that in turn will mean that you're going to be more attractive to a broader spectrum of people, and not just a very specific audience. And, you know, as sort of we saw in Alexandra's presentation, we're often accused of basically reporting to people like ourselves. And if we're going to stop doing that, we're going to need to think about, well, what is it that we're doing that is constantly perpetuating that kind of idea.
At the start of our conversation, Ramaa, I actually forgot to acknowledge the diversity that already exists in this virtual room. Yeah, so I want to make it very, very clear. There is a very diverse room already, and we, you and I today are looking at the question of diversity from a particular lens, our own experiences, especially within the BBC. Now, Ramaa, what would you say the obstacles organizations might encounter in the process of diversifying their newsrooms?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess your geographies will have an impact. I mean, London is very multicultural. You know, 40% of London is ethnic in a way, so it should be easier in places like London. Obviously, it would be more difficult in some of our rural towns where there isn't that kind of diversity even in the town. But also, you know, we're a sort of shrinking industry, aren't we? So recruitment and resources is not, you know, we can't just recruit anybody to add to the mix. And I think that is a real challenge. And I am sort of saying to colleagues, you know, we ought to also be exploring what are the creative ways in getting diversity around the room, but in a very generous way. You know, we must make sure. You know, I'm often finding myself invited to things and you don't want people to feel used. And I think that's really important. So how do you offer generosity when people are offering their wider perspectives? So I think it is about creative thinking. I think there has to also be a general will, like a real will that this is going to make a difference to our journalism, to the way we solve problems. And realizing that sometimes it may create creative tension as well. And so that piece about just thinking about this question really deeply is really important. And I think the first start, I think the systems of making sure there is a real mix, and, you know, some people use a kind of quota-based system, is a sort of a step in the right direction. But the inclusion piece and just generally thinking about how we think about our meetings, but equally think about our editorial strategies and think about our policies is also equally important.
And what I hear in what you are saying, Ramaa, also echoes some of Alexandra's findings: support, explicit support from the top. Sometimes conversation as well can be a bit tricky and uncomfortable, and that's part of the learning and the stretch that newsrooms sometimes and leaders and managers have to do. Well, what do you think that the most powerful arguments one or you can use to speed up diversity, equity, and inclusion within newsrooms? Yeah,
I mean, it is in all the, you know, I'll give an example. So I grew up in two cultures. So I always knew that there was two frames of ways of looking in the world and operating the world and being in the world. You know, I was born in Britain, but my parents are of Indian heritage. But growing up, I realized that there was a certain frame and a certain kind of story that was very acceptable to the newsroom and to an editor, versus the other part of my life was sort of niche or not as relevant. And what's happening now is what I've noticed, the third generation in the country, and you know, is saying, well, actually accept me for my whole self, right? Accept me for my ethnicity, for my gender, for my class, for, you know, and so we are in a place where we mustn't see people as minorities or niche, because I can assure you, when I wake up in the morning, that's not how I see myself, right? So what I'm saying is that when I did become an editor and I was able to then commission stories that were specific to communities, they did hugely well, because actually there is something quite universal in the specificity of a story, if I can say the word. You know, there's that you know, issues of that community won't be relevant. Just not true.
Okay.
If you find that,
can you?
That
Okay, your line broke down just now. I'm just wondering whether you could go back to this issue of some specific stories have got universal value.
Yeah, specific stories do have universal value. So, you know, we should, I personally think, stop seeing things as sort of, oh, well, that's niche, because surely that only appeals to one particular community. The data doesn't show that. Those stories that we commissioned did hugely well with a wide range of stories, and also were deeply appreciated by those smaller communities who never see themselves represented. So all of a sudden now they're like, oh, well, maybe this big organization is for us. Actually, they do matter. You know, BBC is relevant to me. So increasingly, when you're up against basically the internet that can provide people with exactly what you want, if you're not sensitive to the worldviews and the perspectives of your audience, you're just going to you might come across out of date, quite frankly.
And that there are people on the chat at the moment, Ramaa, that are really welcoming the very powerful sentence you've just given, which is, you don't see yourself as niche, you don't see yourself as minority. And that's quite important for audiences as well, that they become central and think of them as central. What you said as well, Ramaa, about the need, people want to belong to organizations, and sometimes they adapt, they leave something outside the organization. To give a practical example that I've been through is, I've recruited a fairly high number of talent right across Africa. And we were recruiting them for their desire, their editorial judgment, their sharpness, and their on-air talent, be it on radio and television. And what we discovered after 3 weeks within the BBC building in London, people would present shows differently. They would change their tone. They would change their voice to fit in. And I would go and have a chat and say, oh, okay, what's happening here? And people would say, well, I'm on the BBC now. And then I would say, hold on, you are the BBC. You are the BBC. You belong, you're part of it. You don't need to drop something because the thing you are dropping is the precise thing we've recruited you for. So it's create organizations, local and international organizations of true belonging, I think, where we don't need to leave anything at the door. I'm tempted, Ramaa, to do.
Before you move on, I was just thinking, you know, it's the point about authenticity, isn't it? It's the fact that if we can be authentic at work, what does that then mean about the work we do and the way we relate and the problems we solve and the way we do our reporting? So, you know, that adapting, norming to the way, you know, that is why you can all of a sudden hire lots of diverse people. But if you're not actually, you don't have the culture that encourages difference and can hold difference, then you're not going to get that creativity. You're just actually still going to create more of the same.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a more personal question to you, Ramaa. You have been a senior editor. You have also been promoting diversity within your organization. Do you ever think at times you'd rather concentrate on editorial matters than pushing diversity?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, the first 10 years of my career was as a reporter, and I just found myself that in order to explain why this story matters and is relevant, I had to do an educational process. And that happened in digital as well. So for me, that's what it's been about. It's been about, you know, me being able to say to the BBC, and I'm really grateful that the BBC have been really engaged with this, which is about, actually, I am one of your senior editors. You've asked me to bring my difference. You've asked me to help, you know, engage with the mission of serving underserved audiences. And here are the barriers that I face in doing that work. And so then I find myself on an education track, which is about helping the organization understand those barriers. So yeah, sure. I want to tell stories. That's why I became a journalist. And I want to tell stories that are about engaging with all audiences. But we've got to think about how our organizations facilitate or not that kind of diversity.
Yeah, I've got a question from Cherlin here, who says, how far do you think news organizations should push diversity agenda if they are serving a fairly homogeneous audience? For example, the BBC London policies on gender and sexual identity might not go down well in a conservative society.
Sure. I mean, this isn't about leaving audiences behind. It's not saying this audience is particularly more important than this audience. It's saying that we're a public service, and this is the world, and these are the stories, and this is, you know, this is what the BBC can do that another outlet might not be able to do. So I think it's personally, my view would be is that actually it would be very enriching to give all audiences a real sense of the diverse world we live in. And that would help with, I would hope, you know, all this increasingly polarization and misinformation and confusion, if we have better understanding of all the groups in society and all the perspectives and all the views.
Now, obviously, I've been part of the BBC a long time, and out of the BBC, you are working within, and I suppose there might be some expectation within this room today to give some BBC examples on how the organization has been promoting some sort of diversity. Have you got anything in mind?
Yeah, so the DG has come in, and really the new DG, Tim Davey, has come in and put quite a hard target on all leaders, which is a 50-20-12 target. So 50% women, 20% ethnic minorities, 12% disabled colleagues. It's quite stretching for lots of different teams in different parts of the organization. But it's a statement of intent, right? It's like, here is something very tangible that the organization can do. Alexandra, you mentioned Katie Lloyd earlier, has also created some diversity commitments that are very thorough, one of which was a race inclusion program that I delivered to the news board. And so this just shows that there is a real commitment to try to understand what this means, what it means for staff, what it means for editorial, what it means for the way we work, and creating a lot of time and space for that. So, you know, the work I did with the board was about creating the time and space for that, because this isn't, personally, I think, a quick, you know, there isn't really a quick fix for this, because the cultural aspect is complex, and it requires something of each one of us to think about who we are, how we show up, how do we relate, how do we make decisions, and when we're chairing meetings, which points of view are missing around the table, and as a result, we're not getting the best possible creative solution that we might want, you know, either as a business, for a business problem, or for an editorial piece of work.
Thank you very much, Ramaa. I would like to open the floor to a few questions if there are any, but as you were talking and Alexandra was talking, I was trying to grab a few key points that at least stayed in my mind. I think diversity works as a business model when you think audience-centric. That's one point that especially I got from Alexandra as well. I think one of the points that I heard is make sure your newsroom reflect your audiences fully. It makes things easier for everyone. But from that point, also make sure that everyone can talk in those diverse newsrooms. That's the inclusion part of the process. And finally, what you said just now, I was think also personally what contribution everyone can make, a bit like digital transformation. I guess diversity is everyone's business. It shouldn't be left in a corner to specialists or experts. It should be owned collectively by organizations. And as Thomas said at the very start, it's not a point of letting go of things. It's a point of widening skills and widening my own perspective as a journalist, as an editor, opening myself up to different frames of reference. I realize we only have about 5-6 minutes left, and I'm wondering, with Nick's approval, I hope, whether there are any questions in the room at this stage. Otherwise, we won't do questions. Francis, Okay, so I'm going to read the question, Ramaa and Alexandra, bringing you back. The question is like this, from Francis. It says, how can we be diverse without crossing lines with proximity, prominence, and relevance? This is a challenge for me where I work. It's hard for an international story to run unless it has been widely reported. And this is mostly due to editorial policy. How can a freelance journalist like me navigate through this? Any thoughts, Ramaa, Alexandra, or maybe I'll jump in.
Yeah, I'm just, forgive me, I'm trying to understand the question better. Diverse without crossing lines of proximity, prominence, and relevance.
Carry on, Alexandra.
Yeah, maybe I should say that. I mean, it's really important to also think through this from the audience perspective. It's not diversity for diversity's sake, to bring in really whatever we might feel. That's at least how I understood the question. Some exotic things, like, you know, because then you're thinking from the reference of, you know, your audience, and you build up this dichotomy, like, this is, you know, this is us and this is exotic. This is not the point. It's just, you know, how to bring diversity home to your audience, the audience you are serving, and how, if you're broadening your audiences, you will have all these opportunities to serve them with the content from the perspective that they understand and that they find it relevant for their lives.
And I'm going to try something with you, Francis, if you're still on the line and here, and I'm I don't get it right. What I hear from you is you are a freelancer, you work locally, you are trying to sell an international story that will be decided away from you. So if you're in Uganda, your editor, whoever commissions you, might not be sitting next to you, might be working within a different frame of reference. And what I hear from your question, you say it cannot run unless, well, it's already out there. How can you change or widen your editor away from you, his or her frame of reference? That's a situation I can relate with. My answer to you, Francis, it is so difficult. It is very, very difficult. This is why we see so many stories about animals in Africa, and that drives me mad. That drives me mad because it is not relevant to people who will consume the story. So this is what I understand in your story. It takes a lot of time to change frames of reference back at base. What will help you, hopefully, is if the editor or people close to the editor or the commissioner of stories back at base is surrounded with people with diverse frames of reference who will be more open to your pitches. Nick, we're going to take a question again. Who says, something that really bothers me. We live in a polarized world where audiences are niche and focused on a particular point of reference. If you are serving your audience based on their interests and needs, is that not with a diverse point of view? Ramaa.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So personally, I think it also depends on your publication. But if we're speaking like from a BBC's point of view, I think our job is to do public service broadcasting, which represents a whole spectrum of perspectives and views, and really reflects back society and offers explanation and meaning from expertise, as we would when we do journalism. So I think we need to get better at it, and, you know, think about that some more. And then there's the part about, you know, well, how do you give niche perspectives a voice? And then again, that, I have to say, depends on the context and the story. So if it's a story about a community and something that's happening in the community, I think there's nothing wrong with highlighting that story. You know, we did this as well. We did a very specific story about alcohol abuse in Punjabi communities. You know, I don't think that you know, is a problem. And equally, what we should do is, if we're talking about a story that is talking about alcohol abuse across society, that we are also thinking about, well, there may be an Irish element here, or a Scottish, or a Punjabi, or a, you know, whatever, a middle class, you know, like we're trying to tell the story in the broadest possible way. So I think both are needed, really, and necessary. I don't know if that quite answered your question.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd also like to add, this is not, you know, just about sort of niche audiences, or, you know, finding whatever catering to particular niche audiences needs. Just look at the question of female readers, female audiences. I mean, why is it that major news brands, major news publications have such a higher percentage of male audiences? Because they just cater to that particular audience. And I founded a women's magazine for business and at Süddeutsche Zeitung back then, and I found that if women are really interested in politics and business and natural science and whatever, but you need to find a tone that is much more that is interesting to them and reflects back their life experiences to really have something that they really feel is relevant to their lives. There's so much. What opened my eyes also is I spoke to a journalist, a female journalist from Iraq once, and she said back then to me, like, you know, all media portray war reporting is always about battle and about strategy, war strategy, who wins, who loses. But when I grew up, actually, I was surrounded just by women, because the men were in battle. They were fighting the war. And my experience of war was entirely different, she said. It was all about women. It was about female doctors, about teachers, about, you know, mothers, aunts, grandmothers who kept this country running. And there was no, you know, you couldn't read a line on these women wherever in international newspapers, because war is always about winning and losing. And that really changed my mind on a lot of things, because that perspective of winning and losing is so prevalent in today's journalism, and we have to get away from this, because this is not relevant to the daily lives of so many people. They're not concerned with winning and losing. They're just concerned with, you know, improving their quality of life, or, you know, raising their families or whatever. So this is not about some niche audience, exotic thing. Forget this exotic kind of aspect of diversity. This is about major audiences that are not included in today's journalism.
Thank you very, very much, Alexandra. Nick, who is in charge here, is waving at me, telling me that time has come up. I just want to add something, thanking everyone for their participation, thanking Alexandra, and thanking Ramaa for their amazing contributions. To the point by Cherlen, the point is, what is it in this fragmented world? What is it that we've got in common that journalism should embody? And for me, it's empathy. Empathy is going to bind us together across those bubbles, across those niches. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks so much to all of you, Stéphane, Ramaa, and Alexandra. That was, I was just saying, there were so many sort of quotable moments that I think we really need to do a really good article on everything that you guys have been saying, and try and get as big a possible audience. And I think sometimes it is a case of people just not recognizing an issue. I mean, I've shown the front pages of print titles to German editors and said, you know, do you see anything wrong with this? You've just covered this meeting, and you look at all the photos, and they say, no, I don't see the issue. And they're like, well, every picture is of a man, and there's about 20 different people on here, and then it's not spotted. And I think that we have to recognize some people just not realizing, just completely going over the head. So thanks so much for covering that. And I think it's a topic that we're going to come back to again and again over the coming months. So we have we're going to give you a bit of time for lunch. But after lunch, it's really a really good afternoon that we have. So you can see Dimitri there. He's all ready to get stuck into the topic of AI. So some lessons from the Journalism AI collab that he's involved with, and also synthetic media and AI generated video. So a lot of really good topics to get your teeth into. And before that, we're going to showcase some really cool projects out of South Africa from our African Awards. And that's really worth staying on for as well. And of course, we round it off with the Pinpoint tool, which continues that AI theme from Dimitri's session. So yeah, do join us after the lunch break.